Imagine you are just performing your duties at work when suddenly the heir to the company gets into a conflict with you for always smiling. Initially, it seemed that this man was just bothering you, but later, after a romance began to develop between you, the reason he hated fake smiles so much moved you. The story begins with the protagonist on her way to a job interview at the King Hotel. Everything starts going wrong when, just seconds before entering to introduce herself, her shoe heel breaks. Despite not having a bachelor's degree, which was one of the requirements, the heiress of the King Empire liked the way Sarang improvised to her requests and promised to get back to her. But for the protagonist, it was obvious she wouldn't be called for the job, so at night, Sarang and her best friends, with whom she shared an apartment, went out to do what they loved most, drink and have fun. However, the next day, the surprise for the protagonist arrived with the sunrise, as she received a call informing her that she had been hired for the job at the King Hotel, which obviously made her companions very happy. Now let's move on to Gu-won, a young heir who will start at his father's company as an intern, so he can learn the basics and grow as his understanding of the business increases. However, Gu-won doesn't hide his wealth, starting with the fact that on his first day at work, he arrives by parachute. But since none of his future colleagues saw him doing this, we see that during the new intern's training, his superior starts to bother him for wearing expensive clothes and being different from the others. In other words, the man has no idea who Gu-won's father is, which was good in a way because it allowed the young man to see how some employees treat those below them. He also made a friend in Sang-sik, a man who tried his best to help Gu-won with some tasks to ensure he was hired permanently, who was also an intern and often mentioned how much he needed the job. However, due to a problem with the copier involving ink, even though it was the superior's fault, he blamed Sang-sik and Gu-won, which resulted in them being fired by someone even higher up. At this moment, Gu-won decided to reveal who he was, explaining why he wasn't affected by the news of the dismissal. He also took Sang-sik with him to be his secretary since the young man was also penalized, and at that moment, the expressions on the faces of those who mistreated them all day were priceless. Later, we see Gu-won talking with his father and older sister. Since the father doesn't know the details of what happened and Gu-won doesn't bother to explain, it seems he was fired for something trivial, making it appear that Gu-won isn't making any effort to understand the family fortune and just wants to enjoy it. In his father's eyes, this is disappointing. Even though Gu-won's sister says a few words in his favor in front of their father, we see that when it's just the two of them, she wants him to go back to the country he was in because having Gu-won around means a race for the company inheritance is starting, and surprisingly, she manages to hide this side of herself very well from their father. The next day, the protagonist's training for her new job begins, and as soon as she enters the hotel, Sarang remembers the first time her mother showed her one, and that's when her passion for the industry began. The protagonist starts by taking care of the gym clients and learns that she should always keep a beautiful smile on her face, regardless of her feelings. But right from the start, her co-worker, who was supposed to show her the ropes, doubted Sarang and took every opportunity to put her down, even saying she wouldn't last a month in the job. Meanwhile, one of Sarang's best friends was suffering at the hands of her superior. This is Pyeonghwa, who works as a flight attendant, another branch of the King Company. And Deyul, the third member of the group, also works in one of the King Group's branches, selling accessories. Despite all being dedicated, it's unanimous that they struggle under their bosses. Now back to Gu-won, we see the man shopping for some clothes, and he chooses a t-shirt with a tiger print on the back. Gu-won buys 2 of the 3 that were created, only not taking all because one had already been sold. And his secretary, Sang-sik, is about to have his life changed overnight because Gu-won told him to pack his bags as they would soon be leaving for the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, something annoying happened at work with Sarang. A client who was making a lot of noise in the gym got it into his head that the protagonist was following him and wanted to go out with him. So, this man prepared a tip and wrote a note for her, then asked Sarang's co-worker to deliver it. Of course, the protagonist couldn't contain herself with the man's inappropriate attitude, so she went to the first tiger t-shirt she found and said everything she thought. However, Sarang didn't know she had the wrong person, and Gu-won ended up hearing what he didn't need to. He couldn't even understand the situation because his sister appeared, asking him to leave the country soon, shifting his focus. But for Sarang, the appearance of the executive director was a blessing because when testing the protagonist's knowledge, the woman decided she was too good to stay just in the gym and promoted her to the lobby. Once again, this wasn't well received by her superior, who said Sarang wouldn't last long in this role, showing a clear case of envy. But the protagonist didn't let these things affect her, and later, she celebrated with her friends. Now we see some years ahead, and some things have changed as the story progresses. Starting with Gu-won, the man decided to return to his father's house after receiving an employee registration document containing the name Han Mi-so. And the protagonist was finally hired permanently at the King Hotel. She received some awards for her wonderful work and continues to perform beautifully regardless of the area she works in. Continuing with Gu-won, he chose to work at the hotel, and now the competition among the King Empire's children has begun. Opening a parenthesis, apparently something happened to the man's mother because when his father mentions making a memorial for her, Gu-won says he doesn't understand, as they don't know if she is alive or really gone. Which prompts the sister to make a comment that makes it clear they are not children of the same mother. As for the trio of friends, Deul took a different path from the others as she got married and ended up having a beautiful daughter, meaning the nights of partying were over. The next day, we see that Sarang isn't feeling well, so when she goes to the presidential suite to fetch Gu-won's phone as requested, she takes the opportunity to make a quick stop in the bathroom. However, since he had also forgotten some documents, we see Gu-won returning to his room and at that moment, he finds an employee in the bathroom. The man immediately remembers the day Sarang yelled at him, so the protagonist apologizes for today but not for that day, as she doesn't know the truth. In the end, Gu-won goes to his appointment, and they agree never to see each other again. But this promise didn't last long, as later there was a ceremony to celebrate Gu-won's arrival as the main manager, and the employee chosen to present a bouquet of flowers was the one who received the Best Talent Award, i.e., the protagonist. While the man was giving his speech, it seemed for a few moments that he was about to have a panic attack, but by controlling his breathing, Gu-won managed to complete the task. When Sarang went to give him the flowers, she did everything she could to keep him from seeing her face, as the protagonist felt very embarrassed when she realized that the man she had so many disagreements with was one of her bosses. However, Gu-won recognized who she was, so the protagonist had to maintain her composure and pretend it was their first meeting. Later, in Gu-won's office, Sarang and the man finally laid all their cards on the table, which made her understand that Gu-won was not the same man who had acted repugnantly in the gym, and now she did apologize for that day. At this moment, Gu-won took the opportunity to ask her never to smile in front of him again, no matter if it was her job, because the man couldn't stand fake smiles. Meanwhile, an unforeseen event occurred at Pyeonghwa's work involving the newbie, and to prevent her from being punished, the woman took the blame, even though it was part of her superior's job. Since her colleague didn't agree with seeing Pyeonghwa bending over backward to prevent a passenger from complaining, he helped her fix the whole situation. Back to Sang-sik, after a misunderstanding with an employee who was hitting on him thinking he was Gu-won, the secretary decided to take her out of the welcome dinner for the main manager and put Sarang in her place. However, the protagonist isn't very accustomed to dining with people of such status, and after standing up at the end of Gu-won's father's toast, the man invited her to give a speech for his son. As always, Sarang gave a great impromptu performance. In the end, she even took home the head of a very expensive tuna, which was a gift from the president. Since she doesn't eat fish, her friends enjoyed it. Later, we see Sarang finding some of her notes and a drawing she made when she was a child, showing once again in her memories that she always wanted to work in a hotel and later own one. The next day, we see that Deul was promoted, and as she had agreed with her friends that when they became bosses, they wouldn't abuse their power, Deyul implemented new rules for her team, creating a healthier work environment. However, it wasn't easy for those used to the old methods. Meanwhile, Gu-won ended up saving the protagonist from a troublesome guest. A lady with significant internet influence wanted to exchange her room for a larger suite and pay with publicity, which wasn't possible. Even though Sarang explained this to her, the lady insisted. Since the situation wasn't resolved even with Gu-won's presence, who approached when he saw Sarang struggling, he ordered the security guards to remove her from the premises. After a stressful day, the protagonist's night wasn't much better. Sarang went out with her boyfriend, but instead of enjoying the view, he became bothered after receiving a call from his friends at a bar, pestering the protagonist to leave. So, the couple went to the establishment to meet them, and what was supposed to be just a few minutes extended for hours. Not to mention that Sarang was left sitting at a table with some girls she had never seen before, while the man seemed very close to his colleagues, most of whom were women. Putting all these facts together, the protagonist decided to leave, and seeing her go, the boyfriend promised to say goodbye to the others to accompany her. However, as soon as he went back inside, he forgot about Sarang waiting outside, so the protagonist decided to leave sad and alone. Meanwhile, Gu-won was searching the company's records for the name Han Mi-so, and even though he had this person's employee documentation printed, the database couldn't locate her. The next day, we see the trio Sang-sik, Sarang, and Gu-won traveling to promote the new main manager's entry at the King Hotel. However, before the live recording began, Hwaran sent new questions to the protagonist about Gu-won's mother. When the woman asked them live, Gu-won just gave her a disappointed look and walked off. Thus, Sarang had to improvise until he returned, and as we already know, she is very good at this. Once Gu-won composed himself, he returned to the interview and asked to see the questions selected for the protagonist. All involved his mother, so Gu-won threw the cards in the air and asked Sarang to conduct it her way. As there was a beautiful sunset behind them, the two stood up to watch and invited the viewers to do the same, which worked and went viral on social media. But when the filming ended, Sarang expressed her irritation with the situation, as not following the script could cause her dismissal. However, since it was a very personal matter for Gu-won, he didn't even explain what the problem was in the interview. Now alone in his hotel room, we see that the broken pocket watch Gu-won always carries was a gift from his mother. The next day, we see Pyung-hwa thanking Ro-woon for his help with a gift for his mother. Continuing with the protagonist, the photographers hired to take Gu-won's promotional photos were angels, as it was really difficult to do this job since the man wasn't cooperative at all. Things got worse later because the last shots were on a boat, meaning the couple was on one boat while the photographers were on another. But when it was time to return, the captain informed them that their boat was broken and they needed to go to a nearby island, so with no other choice, the two just accepted. Now in a place with little light and no signal, it didn't take long for Gu-won, who appeared to be scared, to faint upon seeing an old lady in the middle of nowhere. When he woke up, it was even worse as he felt like he was in a horror movie until he found the protagonist. At least the two had a place to stay until the boat was ready. Although it was a simpler hotel than Gu-won was used to, it was better than nothing. Combining the protagonist's company with a drink, we see that Gu-won's heart began to fall for Sarang. The next day, the two had a surprise when it came time to pay for the hotel. The old lady took advantage of the couple's situation to charge absurd prices for everything she offered, but since the protagonist is the best in this field, Sarang knew exactly the maximum everything could cost. When she threatened to expose the scam, her son, who owned the supposedly broken boat, accepted half the amount charged. Soon after, they returned home, and Gu-won was reprimanded by his father for his behavior in the interview. The man also said that Gu-won was too old to go after his mother and that love doesn't exist for people of their social status. However, Gu-won made it clear that he needs to know the truth about what happened to his mother, which made his father even angrier. In the next scene, we see the president rewarding the protagonist for handling the crisis during the interview. The man personally gave her a promotion to the Royal Smile, another area where only the best employees work, as they take care of the hotel's VIP guests. Meanwhile, Gu-won realized he liked Sarang, but when he went down with a gift to start winning her over, he saw the protagonist being hugged by her boyfriend, which made Gu-won give up. Continuing with Sarang, she finally realized that this relationship wasn't working. Her boyfriend always preferred going out with friends over spending time with her, and even though he promised to change, it never happened. Thus, the protagonist decided it was time to end the relationship. The next day, to occupy her mind, the protagonist went to her grandmother's restaurant on her day off, and there, Sarang gave her best as always. After the customers left, the protagonist's grandmother asked if there was something wrong with her granddaughter, as the lady noticed that no matter how hard Sarang tried, she was very downcast. And even though she denied it, in the end, the protagonist ends up commenting that she ended her relationship, and as she knows Sarang very well, the lady knows that the boy is to blame for them reaching this state. In the next scene, we see the president scolding his children. It turns out that after having tea with his industry colleagues, the man discovered that the King Hotel was surpassed for the first time in lounge sales, so the president opens the duo's eyes so that the same doesn't happen with other areas of the company. The gentleman still emphasizes that depending on his children's strategy, he will see who will inherit the company or if they will divide it. The next day, Sarang starts at Royal Smile, and for the first time, her superior seems to be a much better work companion than the others, as at least she doesn't demotivate our protagonist. The woman also advises her not to listen to what others say and to value herself without waiting for someone's approval, so she can do a good job and not get hurt when something gets out of control. Later, the protagonist is taken to Gu-won's office to be introduced as the new Royal Smile employee, and at that moment, the man acted like a teenager bothering the girl he likes. This made Sang-sik realize that Gu-won is falling in love with the protagonist. Moving on to the new team that Sarang will work with, since her superior was calm, it seems impossible for her colleagues to follow the same kindness, and once again, the protagonist encounters people who feel a lot of envy for each other. Meanwhile, Hwaran has already begun to implement her plan to double the sales of all King Group departments, so she visited some of the highest grossing stores to encourage them to double their sales and then those with the worst percentages. During her visit, the director already took the opportunity to make several employee cuts, and some simply because she didn't like the way they dress. At the same time, Gu-won approached another strategy that would be instead of just demanding increased work, the man will reward those who demonstrate effort with a greater incentive than they have been getting all these years at Hotel King. And later, Gu-won sends a message to the protagonist asking to see her after work. However, Sarang ends up going home without looking at her phone, and when the man called, his number wasn't saved, so the protagonist just ignored the calls. Now we move on to Deul. Our young woman's married life isn't so good. It turns out that after a tiring day at work, when she arrives home, the woman finds her in-laws at the place, and besides demanding dinner, they also scraped all the food that was in the pots that Deul had prepared earlier for her daughter. Meanwhile, her husband is supposedly working late. The next day, as Gu-won didn't receive any response from his beloved, as soon as he arrived at the hotel, he went straight to Royal Smile and asked to talk to Sarang. The man gave his phone number as soon as he started talking and then invited her to dinner. However, the protagonist refused the invitation, thinking it would be very strange for the two to go out alone. And for this problem, Gu-won found a solution. He asked Sang-sik to organize a welcome dinner for Sarang, but only with him and the woman present, so he would have a perfect excuse. Meanwhile, Pyonghwa was bothered at work by the presence of a pilot who pressured her to go out with him, even though the woman refused him several times, and it seems that this man has something that can be used against her, which is why he keeps blackmailing her. Rowoon noticed that something was wrong when he arrived and caught Pyonghwa uncomfortable, so to lighten the mood, he commented that his mother was very grateful for the gift and wanted the man to take her out to dinner. In the end, Pyonghwa ended up accepting, and they went to a very nice establishment. During the meal, Rowoon gave several indications of liking Pyonghwa, but always maintaining a certain distance and respect for her. Unfortunately, Goo-won couldn't go through the same experience, as Sang-sik didn't understand that he wanted to have dinner only with the protagonist, and the man ended up organizing a meal with the entire team. The worst part is that it was in a Japanese restaurant, and as we know, Sarang doesn't eat fish, so when Goo-won noticed that his beloved was the only one pretending to eat, he asked Sang-sik to get a steak for her from the restaurant next door, and now the protagonist's colleagues will have something to comment about her. Later, we see that Sarang called Goo-won to talk about this strange way he's acting towards her and asked the man to stop, as now the protagonist will have to walk on eggshells to not be bothered by others in her team. The next day, Goo-won is very thoughtful about what he heard the day before from his beloved, but forgets everything when he enters his office and finds his sister holding the pocket watch he received from his mother. Waran is there to tell the man once again to go abroad. She even threatens him by telling him to do this so he doesn't end up like his mother. And we see that the object is broken because of Waran, because when they were younger, the girl told the little boy that his mother left because she didn't want him, and just as she did, he should abandon the watch, so Waran threw it out the window. Besides having had a busy day at work, the protagonist had to deal with her ex-boyfriend when she left the company, and on her birthday, Sarang had to make it clear that she doesn't want anything to do with this boy who still has the audacity to tell her that she's a selfish person for breaking up with him. In the next scene, we see that the protagonist was crying alone in the rain when suddenly Goo-won appeared with an umbrella to protect her. The man was also there for having had a bad day, but as it's not relevant, Goo-won just offered a ride to Sarang. Due to traffic, the protagonist ended up falling asleep with the vehicle's movement, and when she woke up, Goo-won hadn't taken her to a station as promised, but rather to dinner to celebrate her birthday, and he even bought new clothes so she wouldn't get sick with her wet ones. After Sarang was ready for the meal, she was surprised when she encountered Goo-won, who had also changed his clothes, and they were matching. While eating, an employee took a picture of them together and even commented that they would make a beautiful couple, but of course, the protagonist made sure to explain that they are just acquaintances, and when it came time to pay the bill, Sarang even offered to pay. However, because of the exorbitant amount, Goo-won used his credit card. The surprises didn't end there. Now we move on to when the man says goodbye to Sarang in front of her house and gives her a cake to make her day a little sweeter. The protagonist is grateful for what her boss did for her on this day, but also explains that she ends up feeling bad for making the hotel's cook stay longer than he should have on his shift. Goo-won doesn't ignore these small lessons, and in the future, the man will always avoid making the same mistakes with his dedicated employees. However, before the protagonist enters the house, her ex-boyfriend appears accusing her of cheating, just because she was with Goo-won, and at that moment, Sarang was sure she did the right thing in ending the relationship. Soon after, the protagonist enters the house, and Goo-won makes it clear to Yoonam to never bother Sarang again. Later, the man calls the protagonist and asks her to call him if something like this happens again. The next day, we see Pyonghwa at work, and her superior offers her a partnership. As the woman is the only one from the first group who hasn't been promoted yet, her superior promises that if she works hard to sell more, this will be her reward. Moving on to Sang-sik in Goo-won's office, the man accidentally saw the photo of his boss with Sarang that was taken the night before, and now, Goo-won will no longer have peace on the subject. At night, the protagonist goes to see Goo-won after work to give him a gift as a thank you for what he did on her birthday, and in the end, they end up going out to dinner, this time at Sarang's expense. They had a lot of fun. However, in the end, the protagonist commented that this would be the last time they would go out alone, as Sarang still doesn't feel comfortable. Meanwhile, Waran's husband appeared in Korea to ask for a divorce from his wife. Waran knows he has someone else and says it's okay with her, but that now wouldn't be a good time for them to sign the papers, considering the race for the King Group inheritance. However, her husband can't stand living this way anymore and just wants to be far away from her. The next day, Dyul confronts the same lady who wanted to cause trouble at the King Hotel, but this time in her store, and once again, the lady was inconvenient. However, Dyul maintained her composure and took a deep breath to not lose control. Meanwhile, at the King Hotel, there was a disagreement between Sarang and Guwon. The man didn't like seeing her flattering VIP clients on the phone just so they would come back more frequently, but anyway, although the protagonist doesn't like doing this either, she was just following orders. Guwon somehow felt offended. In his mind Sarang was losing her dignity just to get more money. That said, he chose for Royal Smile to go to Farmers Week, which consists of sending employees to spend the day working with those who provide the best products for the King Group and promote photos that look good in a campaign. Thus, being the newest member of the team, the protagonist ended up with what is considered the worst place. Her colleagues didn't even give her a choice. In the next scene, we see Sarang already at the location, where the wife of who would be the property owner comments that Hotel King will have to do much more than just send a gift for him to give in, as apparently, the gentleman is disputed by all the best hotels in the country. The man's wife told Sarang to just leave what she brought and rest. However, our protagonist always gives her best in everything she's assigned to, and this time would be no different. Sarang changed clothes and decided to climb the mountain just to greet the gentleman. Meanwhile, Guwon has already started to feel bad for sending his beloved to the mountains, and the guilt worsened when he saw the weather forecast indicating that there would be a storm. So, Guwon decided to call Sarang, and when she answered, he asked her to return immediately. However, the protagonist ended up spotting a plant that is considered rare in the middle of the conversation, and when she goes to remove it from the ground, Sarang ends up sliding to a more dangerous part of the mountain. When she wakes up, she's thankful to still be alive, but now the worry of finding someone to rescue her begins, which will be difficult, as her cell phone ended up staying with the owner's gift when she slid. Going back a bit in time, Guwon was very worried right after his call with the protagonist disconnected, and he decided he would use the hotel helicopter to go rescue her. However, for this, the man would need Waran's permission, which when she heard the request, obviously denied. So, Guwon decided to take the risks, and without his sister's permission, he hired a pilot to take him to the location. However, the man was only left on the mountain with Sarang. The two could not be rescued at that moment due to bad weather, and help will only arrive in the morning, which is already better than spending the night alone in that place. But soon a person they didn't expect appeared, and it's the owner that the protagonist was looking for. The man helped them get out of that place and then offered his house for the couple to spend the night. This experience made Guwon promise Sarang that he will change the rules of the King Hotel. Seeing what happened to the protagonist and the concern it caused him, the man doesn't want it to happen to anyone else. The next day, before leaving, Sarang showed the owner the plant she found in the mountains, and upon analyzing it, the man said that the protagonist is a lucky woman. The plant is worth a lot of money, and since Sarang found it, the owner told her to take it and also left an open invitation in case the protagonist ever wants to work with him. Soon after Guwon takes a vehicle, he takes Sarang to her grandmother, as she is the lady the protagonist wants to gift the rare plant to. However, only Sarang enters the restaurant, and soon he asks her to put on an apron to help her, even before seeing her gift. When the lady goes out to get onions from outside, she comes across Guwon peeking inside the establishment to see his granddaughter, and upon discovering that the two work in the same place, soon he grabs him to help her too. And after the customers leave, the lady sends the two to the fair, where they have a lot of fun, and in a game, Guwon even manages to win a prize. As soon as they return to the establishment, the couple eats a delicious meal prepared by Soonhee, and in the end, she even makes a packed meal for Guwon to take and pays them for their help at the restaurant. In the next scene, we see when Guwon arrives home, and he offers the food he brought for his father to try. The president confesses to having liked the flavor very much, and soon the subject of rescuing an employee comes up. The gentleman sees this situation only as an unnecessary expense, but looking through his son's eyes, the president recognizes that it was a good action. The next day, Dyul has a lot of work to do, and because of that, she won't have time to pick up her daughter from school, so she calls her husband to ask him this favor. However, the man comments that he will have to stay late at work because of a client, but when hanging up, we viewers see that he is actually playing a golf simulator. Meanwhile at Sarang's work, Royal Smile prepares for a birthday party for the daughter of another hotel's president who directly competes with them. The protagonist started her day excited because the night before Gu-won had invited her on a date. However, when the man arrives at the celebration, the birthday girl seems to be very close to him, which discourages Sarang. But when we see only Gu-won with the girl, we realize that actually only she is interested in him, as the man even asks the birthday girl to forget him. In the next scene, Sarang is having fun with her friends at home to try to cheer up, and right when they are doing karaoke, Gu-won appears at the door of the residence asking to talk to the protagonist. But with all the girls at home, it turns out that everyone sits around the table, and now, some lies are told. Gu-won didn't want his beloved's friends to treat him differently just because he is the president's son, so he introduces himself as Sarang's colleague. As soon as the two are alone, Gu-won clarifies the misunderstanding, and seeing the protagonist jealous, the man understands that she is also starting to like him. After that, we see a new couple emerging, as they even walk hand in hand down the street. The next day, Pyonghwa once again has to deal with that commander who keeps bothering her, and now, the man is on her case because he saw her arriving with Ro-woon. For some reason, he feels entitled to question whether the two are together and even asks if the commissioner knows about what happened between them. However, Pyonghwa stands her ground and responds that none of this is any of his business, which results in him once again threatening to reveal some secret of theirs to the rest of the team. When the situation starts to get tense, with Pyonghwa continuing to defend herself by questioning whether the commander's wife knows about his obsession with her, Ro-woon walks through the curtain. The commissioner immediately notices Pyonghwa's discomfort and senses something is wrong, so after the commander leaves, Ro-woon tells his colleague that if she is facing any problems, she can call on him. Meanwhile, Sarang is doing her job at the Royal Smile when she encounters her former superior. The woman is there to deliver some clothes sent by someone higher up, and once again, she shows envy towards the protagonist, emphasizing that Sarang only reached the top level of hotel staff by luck. However, the woman didn't count on Mrs. Jong being nearby and overhearing everything, so before she could return to her duties, the protagonist's current superior made it clear that Sarang reached this position through her own merit and constant dedication. Later, we move on to the matter of the clothes sent by Waran. It turns out that because the hotel saved Sarang, the woman wants to give an interview to the press to take advantage of the public's positive comments, even though she wasn't the one who carried out the rescue. Of course, there was a script to follow, but knowing the truth and how much Gu-won risked to help her, Sarang decided to speak about what really happened in front of everyone, leaving Waran furious. But in compensation, Gu-won, who had just learned about the press conference and rushed to the location, knew that in the end, his beloved would do the right thing. In the next scene, we see that Waran found out she was losing the race to host an Arab prince named Samir. So, accepting that all her attempts to convince him to stay at the King Hotel failed, when she had a meeting with the board and the president, Waran passed the responsibility to Gu-won, with the goal of having her brother fail and show their father that he is not competent to manage even the Royal Smile, let alone the hotel. Meanwhile, Sarang, who already had a stressful day, had to clean the VIP lounge alone after a banquet because her colleagues were envious that she was called by Waran and left all the heavy work to the protagonist. When Sarang was almost done, Gu-won appeared and invited her for coffee, but since there was still work to be done, the man decided to help her finish faster. Moving on to Dyul, we see her team having dinner with Ra-hee, who is responsible for coordinating whether sales in a certain region are going well. Since Waran passed the order that the stores must double their profits, Ra-hee relays this to the team, but with an even higher percentage than they had received. Dyul tried to explain that the employees aren't even taking breaks to meet what was previously established, but he had a trick up her sleeve and promised that if they succeed, they will all go on a 6-day trip to Southeast Asia, which obviously excites Dyul's employees. However, for this to happen, they won't be able to take breaks during work hours anymore. Returning to Sarang, we see her serving the president and 2 of his friends. During the conversation, the owner, who is a direct competitor of the president, boasts that Prince Samir will stay at his hotel. However, soon after, the president receives news that Gu-won managed to convince the man to go to the King Hotel. To outshine his competitor, the president announces in front of everyone that the protagonist will be the one to welcome the prince, as she is the best employee. Going back a bit to the previous night, we see that Gu-won managed to convince Samir because he already had a certain familiarity with the prince. It turns out that the 2 studied together for a few years, but the men kind of hate each other, and to convince him to accept, Gu-won promised to say only yes to Samir. Since the prince's arrival, Gu-won has already started to get annoyed, but things got worse when he realized that Samir liked Sarang and kept complimenting her. The prince even invited her to lunch during her shift, and since the protagonist was assigned to take care of him, she couldn't refuse. Once again, this resulted in Sarang's colleagues becoming jealous of her. Later, we see that while waiting for the prince to finish a meeting, Gu-won asked the protagonist for help on how he should behave to please Samir and make him leave soon, so Sarang taught him to smile like a Royal Smile employee. After the prince finished his negotiations, which was the real reason he came to the country, we see that Samir decided everyone should go to a palace where some kings lived during the dynasty. Several times, the prince made it clear that he was interested in the protagonist. He even asked them to dress traditionally to participate in a mock wedding ceremony at the temple. However, instead of Samir dressing as the king, Gu-won was quicker, so when the prince entered the temple, he was furious to find the man in his place. In the next scene, we move to when Gu-won and the protagonist are enjoying delicious instant food to relax after a tiring day, and at this point, the 2 are getting closer and closer, almost becoming a couple. Meanwhile, Dyul struggles to keep the house after an exhausting day of work, and when she goes out to take out the trash, even though it's her husband's job, we see that her daughter seems to have more sense than the man, as the girl comments to her father that she will never marry someone like him. The next day, Sarang received a gift from the prince during her work hours, and he asked her to wear it to the party that would be held that night. Moving on to the party, we see that it was prepared in the Royal Smile Lounge, but since the protagonist previously felt uncomfortable having her colleagues serve her, this time Gu-won dressed as a butler, on Samir's orders, and it was more of a dinner than a party. The prince's intention was to propose to Sarang during the meal, and when he did, even I was surprised. Of course, Gu-won freaked out when he saw the beautiful and large ring the protagonist received, but before the man could drag her out of the lounge, Sarang asked him to let her handle it, and with great politeness and kindness, the protagonist declined the prince's proposal. In the end, she even managed to convince him to let Gu-won have dinner with them, and the night ended better than they imagined. The next day, Samir leaves the country with a very friendly farewell from Sarang and Gu-won. For Pyeonghwa, the day doesn't start off easy. While delivering customers' purchases, she ends up getting injured in the cabin as the plane starts to land, and at night, Ro-woon has to help her get home. The protagonist is excited to see that there is a man interested in Pyeonghwa, especially someone as attentive as Ro-woon. To help her friend boost sales with the aim of getting a promotion, the next day the 3 best friends go to a spa and discreetly start promoting the product catalog that Pyeonghwa sells as an employee, which works very well. Meanwhile, Gu-won seems to have finally woken up to the competition for the hotel with his sister, and during a dinner with their father, he mentions that he would like to take care of the King Hotel's 100th anniversary, which removes Hwaran from the role and leaves her furious. Later, Gu-won meets with the protagonist at the spa because he wants to tell his beloved something very important, and since Sarang is with her friends, he ends up spending time with all of them first. Thus, even Gu-won joins in the sales pitch so that Pyeonghwa can get the promotion. After taking a break from the sales pitch, Sarang's friends take advantage of her distraction to talk to Gu-won and comment that if he really likes her, he should confess, because the prince keeps calling Sarang every night. Thus, on the weekend, Gu-won invites the protagonist for dinner and prepares delicious meals for her. However, before he can talk about his feelings, an accident happens in the kitchen, and the fire alarms go off, soaking the whole place. What could have been a disaster turns into a beautiful moment between the couple, and they finally have their first kiss. The next day, we see that Pyeonghwa came in first place in sales and brought her team to the top, but the promotion her superior had promised did not go to her but to her colleague. This surprises everyone, but especially Ro-woon, who witnessed his beloved's hard work and now sees her devastated. So later, he makes an effort to make her feel better. After that wonderful night, Gu-won now wants to be near Sarang all the time, so he brings his work to the Royal Smile Lounge. Since it's not usual for him to spend so much time there, the protagonist's team begins to suspect they are doing something wrong. Thus, Sarang has to ask Gu-won to leave, and he feels a bit hurt by this. Later, we see that the protagonist starts getting a bit closer to her teammates after helping one who didn't quite understand a foreign customer's question, and surprisingly, the man thanks her afterward. Meanwhile, in a meeting with the president, after Waran repeatedly corners him for simply not knowing what Gu-won is planning for the hotel's anniversary, the man decides to ask his father to let him fully manage the King Hotel from now on. This is obviously seen as an affront to Waran, but the president agrees to grant him the branch if Gu-won does well in this celebration. As soon as this important meeting ends, Sarang and Gu-won decide to talk because the man continues to be moody, but since he crosses the line a bit by dodging her hug, now the protagonist is angry. Focusing on Waran, we see that she has already started moving to not lose the hotel, so even though she is not involved in organizing the 100th anniversary, Waran sends her assistant to send invitations to those who will side with her in the competition for the King group. Meanwhile, Gu-won makes a surprise visit to Sarang's grandmother, and fortunately, he is there because when he enters the restaurant, he has time to prevent her from falling to the ground after losing her balance on top of a table. In the next scene, we see that soon he is taken to the hospital, but the lady doesn't really want to stay there. Anyway, Gu-won takes the opportunity to have the doctors make a list of exams for Soon-hee, so suspecting the man's intentions, the lady understands that he likes her granddaughter. Thus, Soon-hee gives some relationship advice to Gu-won and then comments that she will allow him to enter the line of husbands she herself created for the protagonist. Then, Sarang arrives desperately at the hospital room and cries when she sees her grandmother because the woman confesses that she won't know what to do if she ever loses her. After the mood calms down, the protagonist goes to Soon-hee's restaurant as she promised the lady to arrange some things for when she is discharged the next day, and being attentive, Gu-won chooses to stay and help his beloved. At the end of the night, the man sleeps at the place because unfortunately, they ended up messing up the restaurant's power while trying to turn off the light switch to change a bulb, which obviously didn't work, and to not leave the protagonist alone, he chose to stay. And the two slept on separate futons, but next to each other. Which was a surprise the next morning for Sarang's grandmother, who arrived at the place quietly and caught them together. Soon he doesn't seem like she was just discharged from the hospital and immediately goes to hit Gu-won. Then we see that she takes him for a walk so they can talk without Sarang around, but along the way, Soon he stops when she meets her neighbors who obviously compare Gu-won to who they think is more suitable for the protagonist. Soon after, the duo arrives at the place the lady wanted, and she takes Gu-won to a place where savings accounts are opened. Soon he opens a savings account for real estate and deposits an amount, choosing to put it in Gu-won's name and agreeing that in the coming months, the man should feed the account, thus ensuring a good future for her granddaughter and the potential husband. The lady does this because she is one of the people who doesn't know about the fortune Gu-won carries, and anyway, the man feels very cherished seeing that Soon-hee is also taking care of him in a way. Later, her granddaughter also notices how much the lady likes Gu-won just by observing how she behaves with him. In the next scene, Gu-won hasn't been released to go home yet because when he was dropping Sarang off at her residence, the protagonist's friends invited him in. Pyonghwa and Deul bought a lot of drinks because, besides the flight attendant not receiving the promotion, she is still a stewardess. Deul also didn't get the promised 6-day trip, but rather a tiring and non-relaxing round trip to a beach. Gu-won is surprised by the reports and even more so when he discovers that the so-called best employee title for Sarang only earned her a pin and nothing more. Hearing all these things makes Gu-won open his eyes a bit more to how much the employees strive and are not rewarded, so the man decides to change some things in the company and also uses his power to give his beloved's friends, including her, a nice trip to Thailand. But it doesn't stop there, because as soon as they return, there will be a rotation so that all deserving employees are rewarded with these wonderful little vacations. From the moment he asked Sang-sik to organize the trip, the man started acting a bit strange with Gu-won, and when the day came for him to embark with the girls, Gu-won understood the reason. Sang-sik declared himself the best secretary of the King group, thus including himself in the adventure, meaning that since Gu-won had borrowed his friend's name to introduce himself to Sarang's friends at the beginning, for a few days, Sang-sik will have to pretend to be the chief manager. The trip from the beginning was an incredible experience for our girls. The only thing that slightly displeased Gu-won was when they arrived at the house where they were going to stay and discovered it had only 2 rooms, meaning the president's son would have to share a room with Sang-sik instead of his beloved. Gu-won even considered changing the accommodation, but upon seeing Sarang having fun in the pool with her friends, he simply accepted the small inconvenience he would face at night. However, what was supposed to be a trip with romantic moments didn't go as planned because Sang-sik kept everyone together all the time and didn't allow any room in the schedule for our young couple to enjoy some alone time. Nevertheless, the protagonist greatly enjoyed having fun with the girls and trying the local cuisine, not to mention the tourist spots that enchant anyone. And when everyone was asleep, the couple took advantage of a moment alone in the pool. The next night, while dining on a cruise, Ro-woon appeared to join the group. It turns out that he wanted to see Pyonghwa, so when he found out he was flying to where she would be, Ro-woon didn't waste any time. In the end, he only added to everyone's happiness, and the fun continued. The next day, when Ro-woon woke up early for work, Pyonghwa left a prepared breakfast for him to have the energy to face the day. Later, to make the most of their last hours in the country, Gu-won and Sarang woke up early and sneaked away from the rest of the group to enjoy the place alone. This was really good for the couple, as the president's son always took his beloved to the best places. In one of them, Gu-won felt secure enough to tell the protagonist about his family's history. Hwa-ran is his half-sister, and he was born to the president's second wife. However, when he was little, Gu-won's mother just disappeared one day, and since then, he has never seen her again, even though he searched for her extensively. Even seeing the child in tears, the president's staff continued with the protocol of smiling, and it was then that Gu-won developed an aversion to fake smiles, associating them with monsters. But Sarang came into young Gu-won's life, changing this perception, and with her sincere smile, she won him over. Now that she knows what happened to make her beloved the way he is, the protagonist comments that they can search for the woman together, which makes Gu-won happy, even though he responds that it's not necessary. The next day, none of the group members wanted to return, but to make going home easier to accept, Gu-won prepared a surprise for them and put everyone in the executive class. Back at work, Sarang brought souvenirs from Thailand for each of her team colleagues, which helped ease some of the envy they were feeling. Meanwhile, Hwa-ran once again tries to interfere in the organization of the King Hotel's 100th anniversary, but seeing that she was losing the argument with Gu-won about whom he should invite, she resorted to her usual tactic of talking about the mother who abandoned him. In the next scene, we move to Deul, who is already stressed at work because he once again raised the sales target, which is now almost impossible to achieve. And as Deul expressed her concern, knowing the team wouldn't be able to meet it, he threatened that if they didn't reach it, someone would have to be fired, and that choice would be Deul's. Meanwhile, Pyonghwa faces that annoying commander who keeps bothering her again. The man mocked her for not being promoted, and since Pyeonghwa once again refused to go out with him, the commander invited the entire team. However, Rowoon understood what the man was doing, and acting quickly, he said he couldn't participate, so as soon as he was dismissed, Rowoon took Pyeonghwa with him, leaving the commander furious. Moving on to the unexpected meeting of the pair, Rowoon talks once again about his feelings when questioned about them, and Pyeonghwa explains that she can't reciprocate. However, as expected from this incredibly polite person, Rowoon says it's okay, she can feel comfortable with her feelings, as he will do the same, always without crossing the line, if that's what she wants. In the following days, Goo-won and Sarang focused on the hotel event, and in their free time, they enjoyed each other's company. But during one of their breaks, the president's son took the opportunity to visit his beloved's grandmother and bring some gifts from Thailand for the lady and her friends. Getting closer to his future grandson-in-law, soon he tells him Sarang's story. The protagonist never complained about growing up away from her mother, but when she grew up and missed her, during Sarang's move, an accident happened, and the girl's grandmother was the only person she had left. Hearing this story touched Goo-won, and he promised the lady that he would protect and take care of both of them as much as he could. Meanwhile, Sarang was up to something at the hotel. When she learned that the doorman was the person who had worked there the longest, she asked him if he happened to know a former employee named Miso, who is Goo-won's mother. The man even remembers her, but he doesn't have any information about the woman, although he suggests someone who works in the laundry that might help Sarang with this. In the next scene, we see Hwaran talking with the president, and the woman tries to start a discord between the man and Goo-won. First, she asks the president to remove him from organizing the event and the rights he has at the hotel. Then, when the first request doesn't work, Hwaran comments that Goo-won is becoming more like his mother every day, which affects the man a bit, causing him to leave the room. Later, we see the president talking with Goo-won, and concerned about the direction things might take, he warns his son that he knows what he wants to change in the King group, but it's better not to do it, and this is just a warning. The next day, the big 100-year event arrived, and it was very well organized, leaving everyone enchanted. Demonstrating that he really didn't follow what his sister imposed, Goo-won invited a former hotel guest, whose father was responsible for planting and donating a beautiful tree in front of the place, and most importantly, the first associate the hotel had, to give a speech. This obviously left the woman irritated because she had arranged with her guest that he would have a chance to speak right after the president, but as I just mentioned, it was Hwaran who gave her word, not Goo-won. In any case, the president was very pleased with Goo-won's gesture and was even moved to meet the son of an old friend. Afterward, Goo-won invited the doorman to the stage to say a few words as the longest-serving employee, and once again, Hwaran was annoyed. Looking at the faces of each guest, we can see that many of them are long-time employees, and this event tested what Goo-won defends most, that it's the employees who make the company. Thus, they were the ones who gave the subsequent speeches, and Hwaran was left speechless in front of her special guest. Later, the president retrieved an old plan that Goo-won's mother had made for the hotel, which is exactly how his son wants to transform the place. Il-hun was happy to reminisce, but Hwaran brought him back to reality when she found him and demonstrated her fury. To celebrate the success of the event, Sarang took advantage of Pyeonghwa not being home and invited Goo-won to spend the night there. However, in the end, Deul invited Roowon, Sang-sik, and Pyeonghwa to hang out at the residence, and just when romance was blossoming, the group caught the two kissing. Now that they know a bit about the couple, the girls demand that there be no more secrets between them. Thus, Goo-won decides to reveal that he is the president's son and that Sang-sik is actually his secretary. The girls and Rowoon are surprised by this news and quickly change the way they treat Goo-won. But over the evening, he mentions that it was good to hide this at the beginning because it allowed him to identify several flaws his father's company had in various departments. Besides Sarang's friends, Sang-sik was also upset about not knowing about their relationship and even made a scene for Goo-won. The next day, we start with a scene where the shareholders are very pleased with the event's outcome and even say they now think differently about Gu-won, who previously just seemed like a spoiled man. However, Hwa-ran doesn't like hearing these words and reminds them who has been by their side all this time, cleaning up some messes and granting favors. In the end, she asks that only those who follow her attend the meeting with the president and hotel management. Knowing the event's success, the next step was for the president to pass the hotel's management to Gu-won, but Hwa-ran changed that by bringing up an emergency plan to deal with the King Group's crisis. The president isn't naive. He knows his daughter just wants to delay Gu-won from taking over the King Hotel, so to avoid giving either of them an advantage, he says that whoever presents the best emergency plan will get the hotel. Meanwhile, Pyung-hwa, tired of being made a fool at work, spoke with her superior, who will leave that position for another, on her last day. She demanded an apology for promising her a promotion and not delivering, but the superior threatened Pyung-hwa. She said that if Pyung-hwa continued bothering her, she would reveal the woman's secret to everyone, the one the commander keeps bragging about, which is that Pyung-hwa is divorced. It turns out that in Korea, it's still a bit difficult to talk about topics like this. A divorced woman isn't viewed favorably, and in this case, it worsens when we learn that Pyung-hwa was deceived. Her ex-boyfriend, when they celebrated 100 days of dating, joked with Pyung-hwa that she should sign some documents, which turned out to be a marriage certificate, and unknowingly, the man registered the document as soon as they ended the relationship. When the girls found out, they did everything to help their friend, but the only way to annul the marriage certificate was to file for divorce. Returning to the protagonist, an awkward situation arose at her work. Hwa-ran invited her special guest to lunch at the Royal Smile to apologize, but already irritated and perhaps lacking manners, the man started getting annoyed with everything Sarang did and eventually threw a napkin at the protagonist, demanding that Hwa-ran fire her. Even knowing that Sarang wasn't to blame for the man's behavior, Hwa-ran was going to proceed with the protagonist's dismissal and was only stopped when Gu-won appeared. Of course, the deputy was even more irritated by the way Gu-won asked him to be more respectful and soon left the place. This led Hwa-ran to suspect that Gu-won has feelings for the protagonist, and after saying it wouldn't be difficult because it's in his blood, she also left. Later, we see Sarang also apologizing to her team for the trouble caused because of her, but her colleagues recognized that the protagonist had nothing to do with the situation, and now the woman started feeling more accepted by them. In the next scene, we see Hwa-ran inviting Sang-sik for a private conversation and offering him the position of chief manager at the hotel. She asked to know everything he knows about Gu-won, even his brother's personal life. The next day, Sarang goes to speak with the lady who works in the hotel's laundry, whom the doorman had recommended to her. There, the protagonist discovers that Miso was this lady's best friend, a very courageous and beautiful person. Then, when Sarang later meets Gu-won, she takes him to a place that reminds him of his mother and, mentioning that the lady has information about his mother, encourages him to pursue it so he doesn't miss the opportunities she didn't have. Switching to Hwa-ran, she is surprised to discover that her son Ji-hoo is in Korea and scolds him for returning just because he was homesick. The little one studies abroad, but even when he's in the country, Hwa-ran, who is always very focused on her work, doesn't pay attention to him, and now, once again, Ji-hoo feels upset, thinking he only brings problems to her. The next day, Sarang is surprised at work when her superior mentions the dream team to her. Everyone thinks the Royal Smile is the highest position an employee can achieve, but the dream team is above that and involves serving the president at his residence. Only the best of the best go there, and today, as they need one more employee, Sarang was chosen. As expected, it's a team where everyone is very well trained, and mistakes aren't accepted. So moving to the day when the protagonist serves in this position for the first time, we see that Sarang makes a mistake. It turns out the event the team was called for at the president's house was a lunch where he would arrange his son's marriage to the daughter of his competitor, the same one who had her birthday at the King Hotel and seemed so close to Gu-won. Sarang ended up breaking a dish upon hearing what the event was about, and very embarrassed. Amid confusion, she understood that she might never be part of this team again. Gu-won was also surprised when he saw her, but he told her not to worry and that he would resolve the marriage issue. Then, Sarang is taken to the staff area, and there her superior sends her to work upstairs so she doesn't cause more confusion. Meanwhile, Gu-won really resolved his situation and apologized but made it clear that he wouldn't marry the woman because he loved someone else. The protagonist ends up having to deal with the president's grandson, who is a bit mischievous, but somehow Ji-hoo likes Sarang's way. And at the end of the day, she receives a payment for the work equivalent to her salary. Later, we see Gu-won talking to the president, who is surprised when he hears the man say that he should end the relationship that's preventing him from marrying the woman we saw earlier. The president's excuse is that for them, as heirs of the King Group, marriage is about more than just love, but we know he wants to reduce it to just business. Asserting that one day this mysterious woman will leave him, the president leaves the room. The next day, Gu-won goes to the Royal Smile to see the protagonist because she didn't answer his calls the day before. Although Sarang is treating him with charm, there seems to be tension between the couple. However, the conversation doesn't last long because the woman the president wants him to marry arrives in the lobby. Gu-won wasn't expecting her, but regardless, he makes it clear to her that she will not be his wife and hopes she understands this time. In the evening, our main couple plans to have dinner at a very nice place, and there, all the fear Gu-won felt about the protagonist leaving him disappears. That night, he also understands why his beloved was at his house as a maid the other day and how wrong it is for hotel employees to be assigned this type of work. Gu-won promises to make several changes when he takes over. However, Sarang isn't sure if taking this step is the right thing to do because, after all, her colleagues really like receiving a high amount for a day of work that's more exhausting than usual. So, it's left as a topic to be discussed further later. Meanwhile, Deul, who was returning from the market with several heavy bags, was surprised to see her husband getting out of a vehicle accompanied by friends, both men and women, and then entering a golf simulator. Deul followed him to see where he would go, and after catching him relaxed with these women she doesn't know, not to mention he wasn't home because he supposedly had a meeting, Deul unleashes all her anger on him. But that's not the worst thing Deul could imagine because it's been a few months since her husband resigned, and instead of looking for another job or helping at home, he pretended to go to work to play golf. The man also spent all his severance pay at this establishment, and now Deul finally realized she needs to change her stance with him. From that day on, the woman decided that since she's the one supporting the house now, her husband will be the one to clean the house and cook. Returning to our main couple, in the following days, as Gu-won was very busy forming a strategy as his father asked, Sarang helped by bringing dinner to her beloved, and now things seem to have returned to normal between them. In the next scene, we move to the big meeting, the one that will decide who will take over the hotel. And as Gu-won did very well in his presentation, with a great plan to expand the King Hotel chain worldwide to generate more profit instead of cutting costs, he was the one who won the position of president. This left Hwaran furious, but her father was surprised and somewhat proud for having thought of this possibility. Focusing on Gu-won's sister, obviously, the woman didn't accept her father's decision, and to prevent him from proceeding with it, Hwaran hired someone to follow Gu-won, aiming to create scandals for him. Meanwhile, the protagonist was assigned another task and, for a while, will no longer be part of the Royal Smile. It turns out that because Ji-hoo liked Sarang a lot, he asked his grandfather if she could be his nanny, and of course, the president listened to this request. In the coming days, we'll see the protagonist with the little one, and these moments helped Ji-hoo a lot because before, the boy felt very lonely, and Sarang kind of taught him to be a nicer kid. On one of the days the protagonist was taking care of the little one, Gu-won happened to find her at the residence and took her to his room for a few minutes. There, Sarang found two very cute things. One was the award he received that day she introduced him at the fair, and the other was the first photo the couple took together, which was during that photo session when they got stranded on an island. Later, when Gu-won took our protagonist home, she commented that Ji-hoo seems to be a very lonely child and that it would be nice for him to try to get closer to him because if Gu-won had a chance to change something in his childhood, which is not being so alone, Sarang is sure he would. And she's right, so Gu-won started paying more attention to Ji-hoo and even tried to alert Waran about it, but as we know, his sister doesn't listen to him. In the next scene, we see Gu-won doing what he can to see his nephew well, after his beloved opened his eyes, and thus, Ji-hoo gained the confidence to ask to stay a few more days in the country, and of course, the man agreed. Later, Gu-won also gathered the courage to do something, which was to talk to that hotel employee who was his mother's friend. After hearing the story of what happened that made the woman disappear, Gu-won felt more at peace with himself, as if he could finally move on. However, he also chose not to know where she is living now. At the end of this night, we see that the person hired by Waran is reporting back, as she took some photos of Gu-won kissing Sarang, and it's only a matter of days before the scandal appears on the internet. In fact, the next day, headlines with the images began to surface, and the first person reading them is the president. At least Sarang's face is blurred, but it's only a matter of time before they discover it's her, and at work, rumors about the protagonist's resemblance to the woman have already started. Regardless, Sarang and Gu-won continue their relationship intact. After all, neither of them did anything wrong, and when Sang-sik joined the man, the secretary was already sure who was responsible for the headlines. Only now did Sang-sik think it was the right time to tell that days ago, Waran offered him a high position in the company to betray Gu-won. And at night, what Sarang feared the most came to light. Now the photos are no longer blurred. Not to mention the headlines talk about history repeating itself because Gu-won's father also married an employee, in this case, the man's mother. At least Sarang has a good support network for these times, which made going through this dark period in her life more bearable. However, in any case, the next day, the protagonist already started receiving the unwanted attention from King Hotel employees. They even accused her of seducing Gu-won, and unlike Sarang, who didn't have the energy to argue, Gu-won made it clear to everyone that he loves her and that he was the one who pursued her first. Meanwhile, things aren't going well for Pyeonghwa either because after being rejected by Ro-woon, her co-worker decided to reveal to the team, as revenge, that she is divorced. This obviously upsets the woman, but as expected, Ro-woon doesn't care about it and makes it clear that he won't give up on his love. Back to the protagonist, at least her colleagues weren't treating her poorly like the rest of the staff, and Gu-won even brought them gifts along with a request to continue supporting his beloved. Meanwhile, Waran has continued her plan to remove her brother from the hotel presidency. She held a meeting with the shareholders she controls to eventually oppose Gu-won's position, but things aren't going as she planned. Her father arrives right in the middle of the meeting and, of course, is furious with what he finds. He already suspected that Waran was responsible for everything that was happening, and now that it's more than confirmed for him, he decides to remove her from all other branches of the King Group. In the next scene, we switch to Daeul and see her husband crying to his parents because she's making him clean the house. As they're talking about what each should do, Daeul explains to the elders what their beloved son did and lied about all this time. Then, something surprising happens, even to me. The elderly couple sides with Daeul. Meanwhile, the president talks to his son about wanting him to personally manage the franchises around the world, at least initially, and as Gu-won already planned to do this, he simply agrees. The next day, the president invites Sarang for lunch, and during it, we see the man's true intentions. The president mentions that he will send Gu-won to some countries in the coming months and asks that during this time, while they're apart, the protagonist reassess if this passion is really worth it. Since ordering the couple to break up won't solve anything, this is what he can do. And now, Sarang will no longer work at the Royal Smile but at a small King Group hotel known for sending the worst employees. Despite all this happening and the protagonist starting to feel a whirlwind of emotions, she doesn't tell her beloved, so he can have a peaceful business trip. As soon as Sarang arrives at the tourist hotel, she realizes it's a very different place from the other one, but in any case, it was great to see familiar faces. Having this experience with simpler people reminded the protagonist of her dream to have her own hotel, and every day she spent there, Sarang understood that the employees see the place as a home and family. Everyone gives their best to keep it from closing because, after all, the tourist hotel doesn't generate much profit, but if it were to close, everyone would lose their jobs, and no one wants that. In the next scene, we jump in time, and Gu-won is already back in the country. Intending to surprise his beloved, he goes straight from the airport to the King Hotel. However, when he doesn't find her at the Royal Smile, he questions her colleagues about what happened, and violating the president's order, a girl mentions the place where Sarang was sent. Gu-won left the Royal Smile lobby with his blood boiling, but before going to meet his beloved, he faced another surprise because, suddenly, his mother was right in front of him. Rewinding a bit, earlier, the president had already met with the woman, and we see that she still harbors resentment for what was done to her. Gu-won's mother had no choice. Like Sarang, she was sent far away from him, but because of her husband, who at the time chose the company. All this happened because the woman had created a union in favor of the employees, paying more attention to what they needed and their rights. Gu-won's mother returned to ensure that her son has the right to live his life as he wishes because, in this story, she can help things take a different direction. With that said, she pleads with the president to stop interfering in Gu-won's happiness. She also makes it clear that if their son allows it, she will return to his life. Returning to the meeting between the two, Miso apologizes for abandoning him. She thought it would be easier to protect him that way, but today, she recognizes it wasn't the best choice. Now experiencing the same with Sarang, Gu-won understands what his mother means by this, so he accepts her apologies, and the conversation ends well between the two. In the next scene, we see Gu-won arriving at the hotel where the protagonist is working, and he meets her right at the entrance. Despite having a lot to talk about and both wanting to spend time together, Sarang needs to continue her shift, so Gu-won waits for her to be free. At night, we shift to the conversation between our young couple, and Gu-won starts by talking about his meeting with his mother. Then, Sarang shares a bit about her experience at the place and that it will soon be sold, which is why all the staff are in a bit of a panic. The protagonist also agrees with her beloved that she will return to Hotel King as soon as the peak season at her current hotel is over, as she doesn't want to leave her colleagues in a bind. The next day, we see Pyeonghwa finally standing up to that commanding officer. The man was once again bothering her to go out with him, pushing her to her limit. Pyeonghwa kicks him in the groin and loudly announces so her colleagues can hear that it was the man who filed that document without her knowledge. Ro-woon also takes action, threatening the commander in front of everyone, saying that if he bothers Pyeonghwa again, he should watch out because Ro-woon will make him pay. Meanwhile, we see Gu-won deciding to stay a few more days at the hotel, and in a meeting with the management team, he announces his intention to buy the place and change the management so that the staff no longer have to suffer under an incompetent superior. Back at Hotel King, Sarang feels that working there is no longer the same, and Gu-won doesn't confront his father for what he did to his beloved. Now, as the hotel president, Gu-won knows that fighting over issues that can be resolved without arguments is the best option since his father can no longer do anything to Sarang. At night, we switch to Warren at home, and after a fight with her ex-husband who is fighting for a divorce, Ji-hoo catches his mother with tears in her eyes. The little boy promises to return to the US so as not to bother her anymore, and all the resentment Warren was feeling at that moment is released as she cries more and more, hugging her son. The next day, we see Deul also resolving her work issues. Her superior wanted someone to be fired even though the girls met their monthly target. The woman even threatened Deul, saying she was good friends with someone in the King Group administration. However, after a surprise visit from Gu-won and Sang-sik, the superior realized she had gone too far with someone who was friends with the Hotel King's president. Thus, Deul, who is not foolish enough to accept the woman's insincere apology, informed her that she would report every time she committed fraud by charging unauthorized purchases to the company card and demanding overtime that others fulfilled. In the next scene, we move to a meeting between the protagonist and Gu-won. He takes her to the first restaurant where they had dinner together and was prepared to propose, but Sarang surprises him with the news that she wants to leave Hotel King. Gu-won thinks it's not the right time for this, so he doesn't even present the beautiful ring he had bought and instead listens to try to understand what's bothering her. Sarang believes it's time to build her own story, meaning she wants to find a place to start her hotel, a place where she feels has everything she always wanted from working at the King Group, a place where love will blossom. But first, Sarang needs time to find the right location, and before anything else, she has to officially resign. It's quite a surprise for Gu-won, but he's very happy to see that his love has found a purpose that makes her happy. At the same time, he is barred from helping her financially, as Sarang wants to handle all of that herself. The next day, the protagonist proceeds with her resignation, and over lunch with Gu-won's father, she shares her next steps. Now, the atmosphere between them is a bit better since the last time they talked. He had removed her from the royal smile and practically erased her existence. Sarang then bids farewell to her old royal smile team, and they even prepared a gift for their beloved colleague who is leaving. Meanwhile, changes under Gu-won's management begin to show, and things will be much better than when Waran was in charge. Sang-sik also gets a promotion for being a loyal friend for so long, now becoming the strategic planning manager. In the following days, Sarang visits many places searching for the perfect one. After thoroughly checking several locations, the protagonist is very happy with her choice. Her support network is also thrilled with the path Sarang is pursuing, and her grandmother surprises her with a lot of money. It turns out the lady had been saving money since Sarang was little, and after soon he sold that valuable plant her granddaughter had found, she added the proceeds to what she had already saved. The grandmother also saved another stash of money for all the times the protagonist helped her at the restaurant. Now, combining everything, it will be much easier for Sarang to start the renovation of her small hotel, which will also help her avoid being overwhelmed with debt. We cannot overlook how important a grandmother is in our lives. Now we see Sarang spending some days organizing the hotel and preparing everything for its opening. Meanwhile, Gu-won faces Ji-hoo's departure from the family. The little one is really going to return to the US, but on his last night in Korea, Gu-won talks to Waran, asking her not to raise the boy the same way they were raised since he doesn't deserve the loneliness they experienced. Apparently, Waran seems not to heed her brother, but when the scene shifts to her taking Ji-hoo to the airport, we see that at the last second, she changes her mind and returns home with him. Returning to our protagonist, we see that the hotel is very cute and relaxing, named Hotel Love because it's meant to be a place where love begins. As soon as she posts online that it's officially open, all the bookings quickly sell out. When Gu-won visits, he fills the garden with flowers as a gift, and he loves the location and the place because it reminds him of the hotel they stayed at when they slept on that island due to the boat owner's mistake, where their love started. Focusing now on our couple, Pyung-hwa and Ro-woon, he takes her to meet his mother. Unfortunately, when they arrive, Pyung-hwa discovers that the lady has already passed away. Remember that handkerchief she bought for the lady? Well, it's inside a package in front of her tombstone. In the next scene, we see that Gu-won finally finds the right moment to propose to our protagonist. In her hotel's courtyard, he kneels down, and Sarang says yes to the beautiful ring in front of her. Now we jump to the wedding day, which was beautiful, with all the important people present for both of them. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments, and subscribe. If you liked the video, like and share it to help me out. Until next time.